I got it. I got it.
Okay,
Okay,
there you go.
we're set. Okay. So this is my talk today, how native plants will save us from wildflowers, droughts, global warming, and how we can restore our open space wildflower meadows without sowing a single seed. We discovered this method in 1992 working on 70 acres in Santa Cruz. And it was 99% weed covered when we started. And Michael Shaw wanted to get rid of all the weeds because there were 6-foot tall thistles at the time. And he said, well, why don't we take this nice area and just start mowing around it and see if the seeds will spread and we'll get more wildflowers in a larger area over time. Well, Michael decided just to mow the whole 70 acres and see what would happen. And within 8 years, we went from 99% weed cover to 95% native cover without sowing a single seed. So what we discovered at that time was there's 100 to 250-year-old dormant native seeds still in the soil underneath the weeds all over the state of California. I was hired by BLM. They were buying square miles of old alfalfa fields in the Central Valley that had been in cultivation since 1890. They said, how are we going to plant all these areas, all these acres in natives? I said, turn off the water. The next year, native plants started popping up. So what I'm going to talk about is the California landscape changed in the mid 1970s when we had the 2-year drought. All of a sudden, the water district said, if we don't start managing our water, we may run out. And Marin County, if you were living here in the mid 70s, Marin County actually ran out of water pipe across the bridge from Richmond, the Richmond Bridge, to pipe water to Marin County because they were completely out. So the other thing is the wildfires. And I've lived here on the peninsula since the 50s. We never had fires up in these hills. These hills were like our asbestos hills. You know, we had maybe small grass fires, but no forest fires, especially in the redwoods. And so if we convert these weed grasses back to the natives, every foot tall we let the weeds grow before we cut them, the weed grasses, it produces 1 ton of fire fuel per acre. So you know those wild oats grow 2-3 feet tall before we get around to cutting them in early summer or late spring. That's 2-3 tons of fire fuel that's still on the ground, still ready to burn until it starts decaying in winter. And that's what happened in October of 2017 in east of Santa Rosa. That cut mowed weed grass burned 70 homes to their foundation east of Santa Rosa. And if we get the wildflowers back in their place, it's equal to 1 sheet of paper. That's all the fire fuel you have all year from a wildflower meadow. So the other thing that had been recently discovered only 8 years ago is the native plants actually create our rainfall for our area. And so if we're aware of what plants those are and plant more of them and don't chop them down, we might not have droughts like we're having right now. We might at least increase the rainfall and be able to live here for a lot longer. If we aren't aware of the plants that make the rainfall for us, we could get into trouble like a lot of other civilizations did when they weren't aware of the plants making the rainfall for us. In California, the fourth thing is, in California, we used to have perennial grasses everywhere, and they were sequestering carbon in the soil for us every year. But when we converted all those lands back to annuals, to exotics, none of those grasses put any carbon in the soil. So if we replanted the natives, we could maybe become carbon neutral over time. All the excess CO2 that we produce as a society could be put in the ground every year by the grasses in the hills. So what I want to really concentrate on is unearthing the dormant native seeds that are, I'm estimating to be 100 to 250 years old. They're sleeping underneath the weeds. And you don't know they're there until you start managing the weeds properly. And the way to do that is you have to mow them monthly at 8 inches tall. And so you don't cut the natives down by mistake. And I'll show you some pictures of how fast the change can happen. So there's also our agencies are paying attention to the fires now. And so agencies like Mid-Penn, Stanford Hills, and Edgewood Preserve are thinking about managing these flammable weeds, but they want to set them on fire and sick the cows on them again, which damages the natives. So you can't have your management plan being damaging what you're supposed to preserve in the first place. So this is what, you know, I grew up with and everybody grew up with in California before 1970s drought happened. And I remember pushing one of these lawn mowers when I was a kid. And this is a relic, a home that was recently for sale in Los Altos, and you can see that they just put down rolled out the European lawn turf. But after the 70s drought, you know, Sunset Magazine and the water districts were saying, why don't we start switching out these lawns? Because the lawns overall, you know, before the 70s, the lawns were sucking up about 40% of the whole household water use. So they said, well, why don't we try like succulents? There's a nice succulent garden. And succulents and other drought-resistant plants, and maybe drought-resistant shrubs, and drought-resistant flowering subshrubs. But you'll see in this picture, there's a few things that are native to California, but not everything native to California. So what my plan has been since 1992 is, what about if we only use local natives, and our purpose was to restore the original ecosystem of the area that we're working in, like the peninsula. So this is my project in year 3. It's in Los Altos Hills. It's Kim Scott's place. That's her house in the background. It's at the corner of Anacapa and Vizcaino. So if you parked at that corner and walked down Vizcaino, this is the view from right near her driveway in April. So the way we had to seed here because there weren't dormant seeds in the soil to work with. So this is all seeded, but the way we got rid of the weeds is, if you look at the closest poppy plants, we put down about 4 inches of wood chips from a wood, you know, cutting company. And so, and then we scraped out little 1-by-foot football shaped divots to plant the seeds. So I'm going to tell you about the proper way to plant seeds, but this is how you can get basically an instant native local meadow quickly. But the downside is you haven't fertilized or gotten rid of the weeds. The weeds are still in the soil underneath that mulch. So this is not a long-term solution. This is a quick fix, but you really have to do the whole thing at the same time. So if you're going to plant natives from seeds, I'm going to tell you some stories, and you're going to talk to all the experts, and they're going to say, Craig's crazy. But you tell them, Craig's done this on 800 acres. I've restored 800 acres of California grasslands. And this is the only way I've found to be successful every time. So you have to have 4 key ingredients when you sow your native seeds. So you, and I have this stocked up at in Palo Alto at the Hassett hardware store, and they have these organic fertilizers in big bags, like the blood meals in 8-pound bags, the bone meals in 20-pound bags. They each cost about $20 each. So you get your bone meal, you get your high yield blood meal, your high yield bone meal. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning these specific brands is that you think, what's blood meal and what's bone meal? They're very different. Each producer produces it from a slightly different source, and they process the material in a slightly different way. So the blood meal is actually, it's almost like pelletized instead of being a fine powder. So it's easier to use. And then you get your potting soil. So you mix your 2 fertilizers with your potting soil and then your native seeds. So if you're just starting out, I'd suggest trying poppies, tidy tips, or Clarkia, but always sow them as individual species, never a mix. Everybody buys seed mixes. Everybody sells seed mixes. And I used to sell seed mixes 30 years ago until I planted them to see what would actually happen, because my customers were complaining. They were saying, well, I sowed your seed mix and I got 2 out of the 10 species to actually come up. What I didn't realize was those seedlings, as they grow, are giving off natural chemicals that act like herbicides. This is the way they make space for themselves and not other species. So whenever you sow a poppy seed next to a native grass seed, next to a Clarkia seed, they're all giving off a chemical to have space for their own kind. So if you want 3 species, sow them, but sow them as a mosaic, never a mix. So if you look at California this time of year, and you don't see wildflowers, you just see this solid sea of green. Or in summer, you just see this solid tan color. You don't have a native area. Our native areas should be blooming from March to November. Something should be blooming if you have a native area. The other thing you can tell is, you see how this looks like felt? You don't see any what we call bunch grasses. That's our native grasses. We have 300 kinds of grasses in California, and they grow in bunches. If you look at our California flag underneath the grizzly bear, when they designed the flag in 1850, the bunch grasses were so common, they couldn't just paint this green felt thing underneath the bear. They put 13 individual bunch grasses at the right height, at the right spacing of what our hills looked like originally, before the weeds came. So if you see this green, it's got to go. This is what's causing most of the fires in California. It's not the trees catching fire, it's not the shrubs catching fire, it's this tinder underneath at the rate of 1 to 5 tons per acre that's causing all these fires every year. This this ecosystem before the European weed grasses came in was pretty much a fireproof habitat. If a fire came through, the plants that grow in the summer, that bloom in the summer, like the tar plants and the gum plants, they're fireproof. A fire comes up to them, they stop the fire. The fire can't go any further. So this is a screenshot from the Santa Rosa fire a couple of years ago by Cal Fire. And you don't see the trees on fire, you don't see the shrubs on fire. It's those darn weed grasses that are carrying the fire. And this is another screenshot. That's what a eucalyptus looks like when it catches fire. If we have any eucalyptuses in these hills and they're not gone in the next 5 or 10 years, this is what Portola Valley, Woodside, Hillsborough may be faced with, a 200-foot tall torch, basically. So this is where my cousin lives, up in Santa Rosa in the Bennett Ridge subdivision. And this is the before picture. So this is real similar to Portola Valley and Woodside. This is oak woodland with houses spaced, every acre or so. But they have the weed grasses underneath the trees. Everybody trim their trees back, trim their shrubs back, cut their weed grasses, but they cut them late. They cut them when they turn brown. So they're burned to ashes. Burned to ashes. My cousin's house was saved because 20 years ago when he bought the house, I said, Mitch, you better get rid of those weed grasses. He did, but watching his neighbor's house burn to its foundation because there was no fire people. So this is what weed grasses can do. You cut them, you think you're good for the summer, forget it. As long as that thatch is on the ground, it's not going to decay until December, until the rains hit it. So currently, Mid-Penn is writing an EIR because they're concerned about fires. Actually, the Woodside Fire Marshal kind of laid the law down on them, and Stanford. She told them before she retired, both agencies, if you don't manage your weed grasses and we have to fight a fire on your properties, guess who's going to pay for it? So all of a sudden, Mid-Penn's writing an EIR right now to start burning and grazing the wildflower fields to control the flammable weeds. So I've been monitoring this part of Russian Ridge since 2002. So I was able to do vegetation transects up this ridge and every year, and then they set it on fire and then continue to do transects to see what the results would turn out to be. So they killed 2 million native plants in the wildflower fields and helped 2 million more weeds spread faster because the fire was too hot. You went from 1 sheet of paper, if you burned a wildflower field, to 2 to 3 tons of fire fuel. It kills the natives. And the grazing does the same thing. The cows will eat the natives before they'll eat the weeds. So we need to immediately stop all the burning and the grazing that's destroying our open space wildflower meadows and go to hand string trimming. This is my guy. This is my project in Woodside, 15 acres across from 144 Alta Mesa. Anybody can go see. It's owned by the town of Woodside. There's no signs. You just park across from 144 Alta Mesa. There's no official parking lot. It's sort of like the secret dog park. You can run your dog off leash. And so we're out there monthly for the last 5 years, hand string trimming. And the key is, this is just like a week ago, You can see the seedlings are sprouting. Now this is mostly native grasses. We have an annual native grass in California. It only grows about 6 inches tall, but it gives off a chemical that's so strong that once you get it in, the weeds can't come back. So what we want to do is we're trimming off, this is native grass thatch actually. This is the Stipa pulchra, the purple needlegrass that grew up in the summer, and we cut it down while it's still dormant this time of year, but we want more light to get to the wildflower seedlings that are coming up at the same time. So this is the result. This is what we started with at Woodside. You see the little water bottle and 5 foot tall wild oats. And this is after 2 or 3 years of hand string trimming once a month. We're almost back to solid natives without sowing a single seed. And even with the little rainfall we're getting, it's going to be a spectacular display from April to October this year. It's the native seedlings are coming up at 3 to 5 per square inch right now. So if you're working on your own property in Los Altos and you have an area that's not landscaped but has some weeds growing in it, this is one of the first natives that we unearth whenever we manage the weeds here in Woodside, Portola Valley, etc., is the miner's lettuce. And the miner's lettuce is another plant that if it gets in and it starts giving off its chemicals, weeds cannot get back in. It's almost like having spraying the area with herbicides because the chemical is so strong. And the other good effect is that when it goes dormant for the summer, there's nothing to burn. It's zero biomass. So this is at Woodside. This is just to show you in 1 year what you could do, what we could do in all of our open spaces, like Russian Ridge, like Edgewood Preserve, like the hills below the dish at Stanford. I've been talking to these agencies for 20 years. None of them have ever even tried my method on a small scale to see if it would do any good for them. So this is where this is the Alta Mesa in the background. And this is where I wasn't expecting to get anywhere with. This is like 3 foot tall ripgut grass. Ripgut grass, when it starts drying out, it just flattens out. So it's almost impossible to cut. I'm thinking, this is making so much material and so many seeds. I mean, look at the seeds there. I'm not going to get anywhere in any short time. In 1 year, poppies are popping up. I still have the ripgut to deal with, but the poppies are gaining ground in only 1 year. So then I think if everybody at this meeting watching this asks, you might not have an area in your own yard that needs help, but all of our open space grasslands desperately need help. And if we ask the managers, how come you don't try Craig's method on a small scale and see if we can get, this is what he's able to do. Go see what he's been able to do. I mean, I haven't even been able to get these people to come out and look at what I've been doing, let alone set aside, 1/10 of an acre and mow it once a month and see what might happen. So here's my preserve, and here's the homes right next to it. So I think the investment in this little extra work, we get rid of those weed grasses. Those flammable weed grasses are permanently gone in 4 or 5 years. You don't have to keep mowing them for eternity. You mow them, the natives come back, you're done. You go home, you have a good life. So this is this $5.3 million house I'm really concerned about, because they're not trimming the shrubs around their home. So even if I get a little fire, I've been talking to the fire district. please trim your shrubs at least. But so this is why it's so important that these urban preserve interfaces at least we give a try to. And here's another view. Now I'm bordered. That's 280 in the corner there. You're going to maybe hear from experts. Let's put experts in quotation marks. That you never fertilize natives. And their excuse is that somehow the nitrogen that's coming into the atmosphere off of cars is making the weeds grow better. My best habitat is along the fence on the along 280. It's like, no, we skip that. We skip that idea because that doesn't fly. So to talk about drought, native plants and drought, this is, you know, we thinking about native plants for water supply issues and helping things be beautiful and not having to water things. But this is really what we're faced right now. This is the current national drought map. And the darker red it is, the worse it is. So the entire Colorado River watersheds, you know, kaput. I don't know what Los Angeles is going to do other than to try to vacuum out our rivers up here in the north. But we're not in good shape either. I'm having to water my oak trees because they're dropping leaves like it's late summer. No water's really gone down into the root zone for our trees. So keep an eye on your trees, that unless we get rainfall here on out about an inch a week, you need to put the water on the trees so you can save them. So this is an article that came out in April 2012 in Discover magazine. That's the cover article. Do high-flying microbes control Earth's weather? They didn't, the scientists, when I was a kid, the scientists said, well, raindrops and rain clouds are formed by dust particles. The moisture condenses around these dust particles and they form, you know, clouds, and then it rains, right? Well, about 10 years ago, they started flying aircraft up into the clouds thinking, I wonder if there's something living up there. And then they figured out, well, our clouds are made by bacteria because the outside of their structure makes water be able to freeze at a higher temperature. They have a perfect structure for forming clouds. So if we look at clouds, we're actually looking at gigantic petri dishes in the sky. That's just the big cloud of bacteria, basically. So we don't know what native plants are the host plants. And this is a photo of our hills here from Woodside of a cloud being born in the winter. So what happens is the rain comes from Asia. It starts in the tropical forests of Asia. The bacteria living in the tropical forest forms a cloud. It comes across the Pacific and it hits our coast range and it gets amplified. And then that amplified cloud goes and makes snow in the Sierras. So we don't realize how important the little native plants growing in the strip of forest that we have here on the coast are, but it's where, because of the temperatures are right, the bacteria is still active, forming rain clouds for us every year, but we don't know what those are. This would be a great, I think every high school on the peninsula should have the kids go up in these hills and find out what plants these bacteria are living on and forming the clouds for us. So everybody can help unearth the wildflower seeds that we have sleeping in our open spaces. Contact the managers and ask them why they are not trying my method. And that's it. you have any questions.